Okay, so my name is Manny Straley, and Liberty Munson is joining us. So hopefully you can all hear me, and I'm sharing my screen. So let me know if you can't hear me. So today we're going to talk about whether your program is ready for remote proctoring. Interestingly enough, I've done these slides over the past, I think since 2016, so the past 4 years, twice for 2 separate clients, and then last year at ATP with doctors Liberty Munson and David Foster. Interestingly enough, when I asked a lot of folks whether they thought they were ready for remote proctoring, they were just waiting for others to do it. So given this, you know, with the times that we live in, with COVID-19 being present, there's a lot of folks that have called me in the last few weeks asking about what do I know about remote proctoring. Well, I'm not a vendor on remote proctoring, but I do know some things about it since many years ago when I was a certification manager, we were thinking about it about 8.5 years ago when I was working as a certification manager at GBCI. And then at one point, Rory McCorkle and Trushant Mehta asked me where we were talking about whether we should even come up with a remote proctoring solution that we could become a vendor in for the community. So we looked at various solutions to that, and we just said no. So remote proctoring has been part of, I think, a lot of our lives, and now it's front and center. So the more important thing is we do want to convey that, you know, we hope you're all healthy and safe in these times and you're doing what's right. And, you know, this is really a mission for all. Like I tell all my clients and my colleagues and my friends, we're no longer in this by ourselves. This is a mission for all. So whatever we could do to help the community, the assessment community and beyond, that's great. For instance, there's a few of us on this call I'm working with on one. We're almost ready launching a COVID-19 self-assessment tool with the nursing association, and then on a larger group, we're trying to get a number of nursing associations to come up with a micro-credential very quickly to look at the critical areas that they need to sort of look at. And I know a few other groups are looking at that, so this is very exciting times on that level to deal with those sort of things. So let's get to the heart of this. Most of you know me. I'm Manny Straley. I'm founder and president of AIR. We're actually turning 5 next year. We're located in DC. We're moving to actually Savannah, Georgia in the next few months. And I've been doing this psychometrics strategy and so forth in the assessment industry for many, many years. And one of the interesting things that's happening is everything is moving online. So my dissertation was partially on online learning. My 13 years of teaching online courses at St. Joe's and through other different universities like USC and Johns Hopkins. So I've been in the online community for many, many years. And our organization is virtual, so we do virtual work. So I'm gonna have Liberty Munson, Dr. Liberty Munson, introduce herself. If you wanna talk up now, Liberty, and introduce yourself, that would be great.
Hello, you can hear me, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Okay, I'm Liberty Munson. I am Microsoft psychometrician. I am responsible for ensuring the psychometric integrity, validity, reliability of our technical certification program. Essentially, it's my job to make sure that whatever tool or process we use to evaluate people is valid and reliable. So when someone says they're Microsoft certified, they truly have the skills that they need to be successful. So Manny and I have been friends and colleagues for a very long time, and we spend a lot of time talking about crazy ideas. And this is not a crazy idea, online proctoring, but it's one that may seem crazy to some. So we decided we'd talk a little bit about some of the requirements. And then at the very end of this, I'll talk a little bit about Microsoft's experience with online proctoring.
Thank you, Liberty. Moving towards the crazy side of things and moving that forward, because that's all I know your weeks have been. in terms of those who don't have the remote proctoring solution at the moment or working towards that. Hopefully this will work to a little less crazy on a spectrum of craziness, or the old GAF scale on the DSM-4 that was 0 to 100, and if you're like 0, you're really dysfunctional. So I think a lot of us declined in that area. So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at a definition, we're going to look at the purpose, we're going to look at some models and elements and features, and then Liberty's going to talk about their implementation experiences and their examples as they've grown through learning a lot about it. And I always find I'm always learning a lot from every time she explains it. And one of the places I do send my clients is to Microsoft's website on remote proctoring, and you'll see there that there's a video that I believe Pearson VUE put together, and there are just a lot of organizations really doing a lot of work in remote proctoring out there. So I'm not endorsing one or the other here at all. And then what we're going to do is I think this will be the most helpful, is that I'm calling this open forum in the sense that you ask, you answer, and Liberty and I facilitate. We'll answer as much as we can. Some of you are more experienced at this. Some of you have the solution already. Some of you are going through the solution. Some of you are thinking about the solution. So you're at different phases in your thinking, and some of you actually are considering it, I suspect. So we have 160 attendees on this, and that's more than what attended this last year at ATP. We probably had about 80, I think, that attended it. It was well attended last year, but this is even more so. So you could see the need for something like this. So what is really remote proctoring? At the end of the day, it's really a technology solution that allows you to monitor someone through the technology devices that we have today in terms of when they're taking their examination. So you have, a computer, you have a camera at minimum, and then you have audio in some cases, and then you have proctors, whether they're live proctors, whether they're proctors looking at recorded sessions, and in some cases you have passive solutions, which is more the AI, which there's no proctoring, but it's called an AI proctor system or passive system. And then just like the purpose in any type of proctoring testing facility, whether it's online or it's in person, you authenticate the candidates. Essentially, are they really the candidate who's supposed to be there? And how do you do that? And we're going to get into that a little. Just to give you a hint, it's showing your ID, for instance, and the photograph matches your ID. The next sort of step in that is you're going to monitor the candidates. You're going to look for any threats, detection of irregular behaviors or potential behaviors that indicate cheating and things like that. Anything that could go wrong with the test itself, that's another thing that you're monitoring for. So and we're going to go into that in a little bit as well. And then you're also assessing candidates and whether it's real time or it's recorded or AI. It could be that they're looking away. It could be that they're doing something completely different in that sense of it. So moving on to the next slide is the different models, and different models are always to be considered. The best of the models and the most likely they'll get you through accreditation. I'm not sure in terms of if passive and no interactions, any programs have ever gotten through that, but my understanding is you want to sort of mimic the test site conditions for accreditation. But let's talk about this here. There's no interaction. That's completely automated system that maybe might detect something in terms of the AI system where you're looking away. You might be you might have sort of time that you're going through the examination very quickly. So they take all this data that you're doing and create an AI model around it to determine whether you actually there were some irregular behaviors in the testing session. Then you have continuous or live, where you have actual proctors, and the ratios are always interesting to me as to what's the most effective. A lot of groups like to use between 4 and 10 well, 4 to 10 ratio, so you have maybe 4 to 10 candidates per one proctor. Now, I never know how that lines up in terms of how that's ever chosen in the test sites. So that's something that I think research should look at, how many proctors are necessary to really ensure a safe or secure testing facility and make sure that everything is going well during your session. And then you have a passive one, which is you're going to record and then later on you're going to have someone to review it. So that's another model in itself. So those are the three common models that are out there. There's probably hybrids of it as well. There could be a whole different model that I'm not including here that came out maybe in the last 2 weeks. I don't know at this point. But what we're looking now into are the elements. So I talked about authentication earlier. That's really ensuring that the person who's at the test center, whether it's remote or computer-based site, test site, that they're really the person that they are. There's lockdown technologies. There's also checking the technology, whether it's functional, looking around the room, make sure there's no evidence of things that they could cheat from or information they could cheat from the candidates. And then the bigger thing is almost anywhere. And in this case, you might want to put one of the elements is that it's at your home, and it might be the most safest at this point in time with COVID-19 as one of the elements there. If you look at the general features, there's a lot of them. So if you look at online proctors, they're viewing the candidate on screen, they're being supervised, they're also trained up, there's also webcam requirements, continuous internet encryption systems in place, so you know that they can't easily hack into it and steal your items. There's lockdowns, and we'll get into what the lockdowns are, but locking down the keyboard, locking down the internet, so this lockdown of the device that they're using so that they can't go out into the internet and look for information on how to best answer that question. Some of groups have open book tests and things like that, so that's something to consider in not locking down, but just keeping that particular file maybe open, or that software application that they have to use. There's a lot of other things, detection support with alerts. So if they're looking away, there's an alert that it gives to the proctors or the proctor vendor. There's monitoring audio. Sometimes they might be talking to someone else if you don't have monitoring. You might want to monitor the logs later on. So there's a lot of things that you could look at, even real-time data forensics on maybe things of how quickly they're answering the question, things like that, that could lead to maybe something that may be indicative of some sort of irregular behavior that's going on. Here's all the lockdown considerations. I'm not going to go through all of them, but we talked about what would you want to lock down in terms of your browser controls, copy and pasting features. Do you want to hide a desktop or taskbar? Some of these are, some vendors allow you to have a choice in these matters, some don't. So there's choices that you make. Sometimes it comes with a cost, sometimes it doesn't. Again, I'm not a vendor, so I can't speak completely to all this at the end of the day. Authentication features, again, we're trying to figure out if this person really is the person who should be there taking the test. So the most common ones is typically a user login and a password, government issue ID, and maybe some challenge questions as well along with it. The more advanced things are the biometrics, like eye recognition software, maybe some fingerprint stuff, palm readers. Photo comparisons is something that some of the groups do already. A lot of the vendors do this, but it comes with a higher price. Like test sites do this as well. A lot of these things. So whoever your vendor is, there's some choices. Some vendors may not have that. Some may have it. So these are things to consider. I mean, if you have a very high stakes test and you have a lot of issues with authentication, you might want to consider almost all of these. If you don't, then you could go with the common things in terms of price, and these all have prices around it. So just think about these features when you get into it. There's a lot of, this is a little dated, this one, but there's some webcam considerations. Most technology systems do have internal cameras. Can the camera really turn in the degrees that you want them to. External cameras are a lot better because they do have that full rotation. And then, you know, what's the cost of an external camera? And then do you want to allow panning of the room so that you could move the camera itself? And then what's your resolution around these things? There's other considerations as well. Some of them are definitely around flexibility, security, cost, psychometrics, and accreditation. Accreditation, I'll talk about the last thing, but let's get into flexibility. This is why you're here. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you know, we know that remote proctoring can do things in certain areas or conditions like we're in now with COVID-19. So it can be almost anywhere and it can be almost any time. So this is the flexibility that it has, and I think some of us are really trying to get this solution in as soon as possible for the right reasons. So this is why remote proctoring is exceedingly valuable right now. So, you know, when it comes to security, this is just a general security, general security policy or approach, more so an approach. You know, you want to prevent things. You want to identify the threats. You want to, if there's a threat, and then you want to sort of say, okay, here's a policy that says now we know how to detect the cheaters, and then now we know how to deter them as well. So, and then at the same time, we want to make sure that that we're able to enforce it. We know what to do if something happens that's irregular and things like that. And some of the vendors may have some of that. A lot of the groups actually put it in their bulletins or candidate handbooks on their websites. So there are some great groups out there that really do a great job in looking into how they deal with security issues around remote proctoring. You know, authentication you have to think about. When they're in the test center, you have to think about. When they leave the test center, do you have data that suggests whether it's, you know, things on camera or whether it's psychometric data and things like that? Do you want to look into that as well? And I think you should. But those are things to consider, like you would do in a test site as well. So there's the psychometrics portion, but before we get into that and move it to Liberty to describe this, I want to talk about the accreditation piece. The accreditation piece, I think we're all trying to figure that out in terms of the waiver. I've been with ANSI on the food protection group, and we did pilot that I think 2-3 years ago, the remote proctoring, and that's a whole different standard, but it is a testing standard for food protection examinations. So one of the things that we look at is all those things that ANSI provided you in that form if you're accredited, and ANSI could provide that form that you would have to fill out, looking at your security policies, looking at your general remote proctoring policies, doing comparison between your remote proctoring versus your online proctoring. So there's those pieces of it as well. So that's something to look at. I think it's pretty straightforward, but some of the standards are not as pretty straightforward in some of the groups. I haven't looked at NCCA's yet, but I hope to look at that, and maybe there's a lot of great talent out there to help you with that as well. So I'm gonna let Liberty talk about psychometrics and take it from this point on.
Cool, thanks, Manny. So what this slide is really supposed to illustrate is that the idea with remote proctoring and live proctoring is you want to demonstrate equivalence, not only from a security perspective, but also from a psychometric perspective. And so that was just building off of the nice segue there that Manny had related to accreditation. I did see that the NCCA standard was allowing some flexibility with remote proctoring right now. I have not seen the same communication related to ANSI, but I assume that there is there's probably some accommodations being made to support programs that need to go to remote proctoring because test centers are closed around the world. But I'm going to walk you through, if you go to the next slide, Manny, I want to walk you through Microsoft's experience getting online proctoring ready. And I will also talk a little bit about some of the psychometrics that we're seeing as a result and some of the feedback. So the question ultimately is why did Microsoft head down this road of online proctoring? We've been doing this for, I want to say, around 7 years. So we were one of the first big programs to launch online proctoring, and we learned a lot. all of which you get to benefit from as you consider to move your program into the world of online proctoring. But you can see that we really had a strong rationale for driving to this solution. We wanted to make our exams more accessible and more convenient, and by doing so, we were hoping to increase our reach. But the most important reason that we wanted to do this is that fundamentally having an online proctored solution aligns with Microsoft's overall cloud strategy. We really want to drive people to using the cloud and doing stuff online, and so this just seems to be more aligned to having that experience than requiring people to go to a test center. We've also learned a few things along the way, and one is that in many cases, allowing online proctoring from people's homes using machines that are already equipped to support whatever disability or accessibility need that they have has actually increased the probability that someone who has certain types of disabilities are more likely to become certified, because test centers simply couldn't accommodate to their specific requirement in the way that was the most helpful to them in terms of achieving the certification. And we also learned that for whatever weird reason, when we initially launched our labs, the labs were actually more likely to deliver in a lab environment. As we have launched more labs and as we've learned and made improvements, we've seen that the success of deliveries has actually evened out across test center and online deliveries. But it was an interesting experience to see that when we initially launched our labs on our exams, that they were more likely to have successful deliveries with online proctoring than through a test center. So there's things that you learn as you launch those programs in the online proctored world. Next slide, please, Manny. So as I said, we launched this. We're one of the first big testing programs to actually launch online proctored. And so we did a lot of the heavy lifting for many of the programs to follow. We learned a lot about what the customer experience would be like and how we needed to educate our customers, not only on what the system needed to be, the system requirements. We introduced this thing called the systems test, so that you can test to see if your system will even run the online proctored solution. We provided more details about what the environment needs to look like to be considered quote unquote clean, and what would be expected from how identities would be verified through the process. We had to comply with all sorts of different laws related to privacy, photos, recording. In some countries, the fact that we're recording sessions is considered wiretapping, which is just crazy and kind of cool, but illegal. So how do we manage all of that and ensure that we can do this in all countries around the world? Was a very interesting experience to truly understand how privacy and these kinds of laws play around the globe and how they vary from different locations, and how we had to interact differently with candidates based on where they were taking the exam or the location of where their government issued ID said their location was. And then of course you have the test security concerns that that Manny mentioned, but we needed to make sure we're integrated in the delivery, ensuring that the data and the tests and everything was encrypted and that we were authenticating people properly, and that the testing environment and the equipment couldn't allow for people to steal the content or to cheat in ways that we hadn't even imagined. And we know cheaters are crazy clever. So next slide, Manny.
Oops.
So one of the things that we learned and that we improved multiple experiences along the way is as I said, it became increasingly complicated to deliver online proctored exams in different locations because of the different privacy laws based on where you were around the globe. So as a result, View, who is our online delivery provider, through OnView developed software that automatically adapted to global data privacy laws. So the greeter would not have to know what the laws were in that specific locale. They would automatically be prompted and the software would handle all of that to ensure that we're in compliance. One of the most common errors or experiences that happened when we initially launched was that people would submit ID and it would be blurry. So what we did is we changed the process to make sure that we, if their IDs were blurry for whatever reason, we could take care of using their mobile phone to take a picture that could be sent to the greeter to confirm an ID so that the blurry ID was no longer a problem. When we initially launched, we did not have a perfect success rate in delivery. So we did have sometimes where the deliveries would fail, but we implemented a way so that if the delivery does fail, that you can resume at the point of failure. Restarts have declined quite a bit, and our success, our delivery with online proctor deliveries is well above 99%. But we do have behind the scenes restarts happening because of internet connections being dropped and things like that. And for the most part, those are seamless to the candidate because of this ability to resume at point of failure. They don't even know that they experienced a failure in many cases. It just happens automatically that we're constantly reconnecting and making sure the experience is as good as it can possibly be. And then one of the most requested features as we launched this was we wouldn't let people have paper for obvious reasons when they took exams from home. So we added a notepad that's part of the application itself so people can take notes, and then those notes automatically disappear when the test is ended. Next slide. Here's what the process looks like at a high level overview. The candidate goes and they registers for the exam. They select an online proctored as the way they want to take the exam. They schedule their appointment. That sends a note out to the proctor and the greeter and schedules them so that everybody has the same schedule and they know when to show up. They complete their order, and then the way Microsoft works is that you go into your dashboard and you sign in to launch the exam, and that exam launch takes you to a secure browser, which then begins the check-in. We have two different individuals involved in this process from an experience perspective, from an on-view perspective. The first is the greeter, who is solely responsible for verifying the identity and completing the check-in, including doing the environment check, making sure that the room is clean. And then once everything is confirmed, the greeter then turns the exam over to the proctor. The proctor then unlocks the exam, and then the candidate completes the exam. During this time, the proctor is monitoring the candidate using the webcam. If they see anything that is unusual, there's a little messaging element or app embedded in OnView that they use to then ping the candidate and say, hey, you were looking away, don't do that again. But usually in nicer words, but just basically lets them know that they noticed something that was unusual and then they should stop that behavior. In most cases, the candidate completes the exam and they may not even realize that a proctor was watching them, quite honestly, because there is no interaction. They just get handed off to the exam, they go through, they complete the exam, they don't have any issues with the exam where they require proctor support. The proctor doesn't see that they're engaging in anything that's concerning to them, and then they move on and complete the exam. Next slide. So we did a little bit of research as we launched this on why people were choosing the online proctored solution versus why they didn't choose the online proctored solution, because it's always an option for all of our technical exams. And the top two reasons, surprising no one, I'm sure, it was the convenience and flexibility that online proctoring allowed. I read a lot of comments where people were saying, I don't have to worry about driving to the test center. I don't have to worry about driving to or finding a parking spot, which can be potentially very stressful when you're already going into a highly stressful situation related to an exam. But I was extremely curious on why people were choosing not to go the OP route when they had that as an option. Many of them were worried about the internet connection and worried about what happens if something goes wrong during my test experience? Who's going to be there to help me? If the proctor isn't sitting in the room with me to, fix my issue, how are we ever going to resolve it? There is also quite a bit of concern that they're not going to be able to find that distraction-free location. And some people just didn't want to do it because they didn't believe it was secure. Next slide. We got some additional candidate feedback when I asked them what barriers do they see around online proctoring. Now, this was our most recent data, but I am very curious to see what's going to happen after we have pushed all of our exam deliveries to online proctoring, how and if and how any of this data is going to change. So it'll be very interesting to see how this plays out next quarter once we start getting that data. But you can see that the biggest barrier, quote unquote, to online proctor deliveries is more than a third of our candidates just simply prefer to take the exam at a test center. There may be a lot of reasons for that, but I find it very interesting that that is the biggest, quote unquote, barrier. About a quarter of our candidates don't think that there is really any barriers, that they may do it if they want to. And probably would if it was an option. And then you can see the distribution of some other issues that are noted as potential barriers. Then the question really becomes, do people like it? And the short answer is yes, people like it. So this is, if you're familiar with NSAT, which is net satisfaction, that's what these scores are. They range from 0 to 200. And the easiest way to think about these scores is that anything over 100 would be there's an equal amount of people who are very dissatisfied and dissatisfied compared to those who are reporting that they're very satisfied. So that if you think about it that way, then the number above 100 is essentially the proportion that's above. There's proportionally more people saying they're very satisfied with, for example, interactions with the online proctors. So if proportionally about 50% more people are very satisfied is one way to think about it. So you can see that these scores are very high and people do like the online proctored solution. Next slide. So psychometrically, when we initially launched this, we did see some interesting differences in passing rates, but as more and more people are doing it and we're getting more data, we're seeing that level out so that passing rates are very similar. We're seeing pretty much similar statistics across the board. We do see that the time spent on online delivered exams tends to be a little bit faster. I'm unclear why that might be. We can speculate, but we are seeing faster times for online delivered exams. We were seeing fewer people taking online delivered exams than we had anticipated when we launched this. But of course, we recently in the last year started requiring employees to become certified, and our employees have a strong preference for online delivered exams. So we saw a huge uptake in response to that. And then of course, COVID-19 pushed everyone there. We do see that the common escalations are related to the length of the time it takes to get through the GREET process, the requirements for a quote unquote sterile environment. That I think a lot people may think that they're overzealous in what we require for the sterile or clean environment. And then FTEs just being FTEs, that's full-time Microsoft employees, because they think that they're extra special and shouldn't be treated the same way, sometimes complaining that we don't trust them because we were requiring them to be proctored in an exam. Next slide. So the question that I suspect many of you have is how, if you're on online proctored, how are you actually, or what is Microsoft doing to respond to this demand, this increased demand online proctoring? So we've been working closely with Vue to add capacity. They are adding proctors and greeters at a very rapid clip. In fact, any employees that can be used as greeters or proctors are being trained to be one to add to that capacity. I was talking to Vue earlier today, and they are saying, so I was very concerned that we would not have any appointments at some point, but they're saying that every day there are still open appointments, so they're doing a really great job to help with the demand by increasing their capacity. We are also, for the time being, reducing some of the restrictions related to people in the room, because we know around the world, if you're stuck at home, you may not have the luxury of having your own room that you can be in. So we're allowing people to be in the background. And we're also allowing interruptions by children because children don't know when they shouldn't say something because I think they kind of oblivious to the way the world works sometimes. So if it's a child that comes in and the interaction with the child is brief, we're letting that, we're not ending an exam for those reasons. I am working with View to see if we can figure out how to reduce some of the clean room requirements, because again, depending on what your home office is, you may literally be sitting at your table, your kitchen table, and some of these requirements may not work in that environment. So what can we do to relax some of those restrictions? And then we decided to remove the labs to reduce bandwidth requirements, because we know that people who are in crowded spaces or even in homes where they're sharing bandwidth across multiple people, our labs, delivering an exam with the lab would be would inevitably end up in a bad experience, because the bandwidth would either make the lab not want to run right, or just your latency would become terrible. So we just eliminated the labs as well. So with that, Manny, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, so just a little bit of research here that was done in 2017. We presented this last year at ATP, and yes, this is PSI, this is John at PSI, and Greg, and I particularly think they did a great job for sort of pushing research on this, that there's almost no research around it, and this is one of the few articles that stood out to me, and I do applaud them on the work that they did and all the questions that they looked at. But if you look at the 3 questions that I sort of extracted from this, is really were the psychometric properties different between testing conditions. That's what, that's what a lot of the concern is whether there's going to be a really difference in terms of score gains, essentially, and other psychometric properties like difficulty of the item, point by serial, all that fancy stuff that us psychometricians use. For the most part, no, I didn't see anything in the study that looked that way. So the next question is, if you go into a testing center, whether it's remote proctoring or whether it's a test site, are you going to have different perceptions that's going to affect your scores, essentially? And there was no difference there. And then the testing conditions, do they have an effect on your score? Like what you have to do, given that you're now at home versus in a different environment? And this study also indicated no. So there's different things. I mean, there could be a lot of different effects for scores, and that's what researchers and psychometricians think about and do all day long, is trying to find an explanation as to why there might be a score gain that's outside of their own ability and knowledge that they may possess. So if you look at the details of this, this is the details. I'm not going to get into it, but what I do want to look at is the ends. The exam 1 that they used, a lot of folks, 4,000, almost 5,000 people there. Exam 2. So this wasn't like a small study. It was a lot of people that they used. And they were using stats that are common to us in statistics and research. And, the reliabilities are good. The standard errors are within good bounds. All the stats here look really good. And so they're finding essentially not much of a difference in most of these things. So that's really what I want to point out there. This is the part that we have some time left. We have about 20 minutes left. I'm going to try to do something where I'm going to unmute all of you, and where you ask and you answer as colleagues, and we facilitate, Liberty and I will facilitate that part of it. We're going to try it virtually. I've never done this with this many people on a virtual call. So this is also an experiment for me. So we'll see how it goes. And let me just unmute you all. And if you want questions, you could put it in the questions section too. So, and if you want to do this in a more civil way, we could also do it either you could post it through a question box, or you could raise your hand, but you're all unmuted at this point.
Hey, Manny.
Yes,
I have a question about the research study.
sure, go ahead. This is Tony, right?
Yeah, it is, man. And I don't want to be pedantic about this, but it seems like the kiosk solution that they're exploring, which is a very valid solution, is very different than the approach used by Microsoft and most people that are thinking about this more commonly. Is that your impression?
That is true. You know, and so the generalization is not quite there to make an incredible claim, and that's a good point, Tony, because it's just one study of you know, not many out there. So I don't know what you have. Tony's Pearson VUE, they're one of their higher level psychometricians. So so I don't know what you have. You have seen either. I haven't looked at the research in a while myself, so this is borrowing from last year.
Yeah, when we did a quick literature scan, this is the one study that seemed to stand out to be out there looking at the psychometric differences in the two methods. But I feel it's a bit misleading, and it's not really online remote proctored in the normal vernacular sense. It's like you're still going to a kiosk, so you're going to a specialized testing circumstance. You're not sitting in your bedroom, you're not sitting at your kitchen table. And so to me, the title of the study was a hair misleading.
Yeah. I'm not disagreeing. I'm more on the agreement side of this, but again, the point is to sort of there's not much on it, and and if there is something on it, this is the closest we get to it. But thanks for making that point, Tony. Yep,
yeah, I can't find very much out there, Manny. We're trying to develop a study for the ICE meeting and try to do more of a psychometric look, but we're finding it very difficult to get data and stuff, and we're moving a little bit slow because of all the COVID stuff. But we think that there's a definite need for psychometric type studies looking at the different methods.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we're going to see a lot out of this from what's going on now. So thank you, Tony. Any other questions?
Hey, Manny, this is Dawn.
Hey, Dawn,
And
how are you?
good. I just wanted to comment because it was interesting to me listening to Liberty that the problems that Microsoft had starting this up are pretty parallel to what I just went through because we just started all remote proctoring this past February. A couple of things I want to ask about, and Liberty, you probably could answer this from your experience. We, as you two know, are all very small volume. And so we don't have people that are technically able to do a lot of things sometimes. So that was a struggle. But I think our biggest problems, and I'm looking for advice on this, we use remote proctors from Examity. Examity's been a great company, but all of the proctors are in India. So we had tons of complaints about the Indian accent. From a price point, I don't know that I can change that. The other problem that we have is because of who we are, many of our people that are taking these exams are in rural areas, so the internet connections are not great. So I was real interested to hear, Liberty, that you were talking about fixing things in the background and people never even knew they were having a problem. I would love to get there. So I don't know if you guys have any comments.
Because you're using a different provider, I don't know exactly what the answer is to your question, but it's possible. It must be possible if OnView can do it, right? I just don't know what their technology is that they're making that happen for us.
Yeah, I don't have any comments on that particularly. I think that's going to be an ongoing challenge. One of the things that I've also found out last year was that there were a few folks that were removing test sites in India and China where there's high incidence of proctor cheating. And they found that was a good solution at the moment. So that's what they were telling me. I think Andrew has a question.
Hi, Manny. I'll just read the question I wrote. Are remote proctors typically authorized to terminate an exam if a candidate appears to be repeatedly in violation of behavioral expectations during the exam?
Yes. So that's one of the, if I suspect they probably err on the side of caution, because we have had, with so many, especially of our employees that are doing it, we have gotten some escalations where they thought they were unfairly, the exam was unfairly ended. And then the really great thing is that, guess what? When the proctor does that, they have to submit an explanation for what happened. And depending on the locale, there may even be photos or video or something like that that I can go in and look at. And so so when we get those escalations, I get that report from View, and then I read it, and then I have never once read one where I thought that they were inappropriate in their termination of the exam. So I think that they do a really good job of ensuring that if something looks like it's suspicious, that they get the candidate's attention and say, stop doing it. And when they do it again, they end the exam.
Yeah, so we have questions in the question box, and we have a few hands raised. So I'm going to go to the question box. So Sarah asked a question here. Actually, let me go in order of this. Just one second. So there's Janice had asked a question. Not Janice, Melissa asked a question. How long does the greet process to clean the room take? Imagine that could be pretty timely given the environment. Do you have an average you see and we should expect? Liberty, you have a response for that?
So if people have read through the requirements and they are set up and ready to go, the greet process takes about 5 to 7 minutes. If they have not done it and they're asked to remove stuff, it can take a while. So I've heard people say it took them 20 minutes. It took them 20 minutes because they didn't come prepared for the experience. We have done a lot of stuff to try to make sure that the candidates are aware not only of the system requirements, but of the environment requirements, reminding them to check these things, being super clear. If you go to our website, and you can find information around the online proctored experience and what the environment requirements are and what the system requirements are. And so we try to remind people and walk them through them, and so that they're not surprised when they get there. But inevitably, people are surprised and they're not set up right, and that adds time to the process to get people so that everything's set up. But it does take a little bit of time. Even in the best conditions, because they do have to do a room scan and things like that. And so that if you're on a laptop, for example, that means, moving your laptop around the room so they can see the room. If you have, and just depending on where your webcam is, it can take a little bit of time to get through that process. I'm not sure where View is on this, if they've launched it, but I heard that they were thinking about implementing a way for the room scan to actually, that time to be done in advance, that scan to be done in advance. I'm not 100% sure if they have completed that work or not, but if they are able to do that, they will certainly streamline the greet process so it can go through faster.
Okay, so Matthew had his hand up, Matthew Turner. Do you have a question, Matthew?
Okay. I was curious, in your experience, what the rate of exams that fail due to a technical issue or a user error, or you get a complaint of someone saying that there was an issue.
So the delivery rate, if we look at the success delivery rate, we're over 99%, if I remember the last results.
Okay.
But what's interesting about this is that we have a couple of confounding factors in the experience, and one of them is labs. And so if something happens in the lab and they decide that they want to end the exam, that's not an online proctored issue, right? But it does affect some of the successful delivery numbers we report. So it's getting more and more complicated to untangle whether there is a true issue with the online delivery that caused an exam to end, or if there was something else that happened that caused the exam to end. And then you have to bifurcate let's take labs out of it. Sometimes exams end because the person was behaving inappropriately, and then sometimes the exam ends because there's a true technical issue. From a true technical issue perspective, the success rate is extraordinarily high. It's on par with the test center. But when you start adding in some of these other elements, we do see an increased rate of online proctored failures when it comes to labs. There's confounding factors there. The lab is probably driving those restart rates and things like that a little more than what would normally happen.
Okay, thank you.
Then Sarah had a question about the lab questions that were referenced in the slides, Liberty.
Yep. So the lab questions, hold on just 1 second, someone's calling me.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the lab questions, Sarah. So see what else.
Sorry, I just wanted to hang up my phone because I wasn't sure if you could hear that. Okay. So for the lab questions, if you're wondering what we're doing, the way that our labs work, Microsoft, so don't forget that. So what we're trying to do is put people in the environment that they're going to be using that's part of the exam. So they are connecting to Azure if they're doing an Azure exam. If they're doing Microsoft 365, they're connecting to an instance of Microsoft 365 or Dynamics 365. So the lab is quite literally creating a connection to an instance of the of the platform, of the software, whatever word you want to put in front of that, the cloud. So they connect to the cloud and they get into Azure and they solve 12 to 15 tasks in Azure or in Microsoft 365 or Dynamics 365.
Okay, and then looks like Daniel Christensen. He had his hand up.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just curious if there was any experience with, or have you seen this done with an oral examination? Do you know one where the person would need to obviously, say answers, and there would be potentially somebody on the other end of the webcam listening and responding and talking with them in that regard?
I haven't, but it seems like it would be a relatively easy solution to implement.
Mm-hmm. I think with performance assessments, if they had to be remote, that would be an interesting model. I haven't seen that yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if COVID-19 would create that situation where someone would be going to some maybe a lab facility to prove that, or even like a landscaping facility, and there'd be cameras all over the place, and they would have to do something, and the examiner and the proctor maybe they would be there at the same time, where the examiner would say, okay, now move this mulch here, or what type of mulch would you use, and things like that. So and then they go to the next station and next station. I'm just thinking of a few groups that that could potentially do those sort of things. So, and I'm not even sure what the crane operators are doing, but I suspect that they could probably still go to the test site in most states. Maybe not. I don't know. So it'll be something interesting. But it's an interesting question. We have about 5 minutes left. I do want to look at some of the last remaining slides, else my marketer will kill me. The ATP conference is coming up here. So there's a few things. We have a performance assessment one. We have with some colleagues in the field that I'm presenting on, and then maximizing your job analysis, and then looking at evaluating high stakes certification program. I'm not sure when that conference is coming. I know it's probably in the next few months. And then July 16th, AIR is doing another webinar about what's the fuss about pass rates. What should you select? How do you adjust it? How do you live with it? We have a lot of clients that are consistently coming to us for those sort of questions. And then the next sort of fussy thing that we keep on hearing about is survey response rates. How many survey test takers do you really need, particularly for a job analysis? So we're going to get into some of that, those sort of things. And if you need more information, there's our website, there's a consultation piece of it. And the last thing I want to do is I'm going to put a poll out. We could continue this conversation as a bunch of us and we could help each other out. And if we would want to do that, I put up a poll on the website and see if you would like to have AIR host an open forum again where we try to answer your questions and you try to answer your questions. You ask, you answer, and we facilitate, and we may answer too. Again, we are here, so we want you to know that we're here. If you need anything, we're a virtual group, and we hope that you stay safe. And thank you so much for your time. And if you can answer that, the poll that I'm just putting out right now. Oops. That would be great.
Yes.
How do you answer, Manny?
Yeah, I was just wondering the same thing.
Let me, I think I accidentally closed that poll by accident. So let me bring it back up if I can. My computer is going really slow, so I'm having COVID-19 issues. All right. There we go. Should be out there now. Sorry about that. Thank you for those of you who stuck around to answer that last poll question. And again, thank you for your time, and hopefully this was helpful.
Thanks,
It was very
everybody.
helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
You're welcome.